A few years ago, I had the opportunity to review an interesting novel take on a field watch. It was the epitome of a tool watch, with an all-blasted titanium case, extra scratch-resistant coating, great lume, and best of all, an original design. It was also pretty impressive, especially it was a watch from a brand new brand. Enough so that it made second place on my top watches for 2020. Back then, it was known as the RZE Resolute, although these days, after a name change, it's the RZE Resolute. Flash forward to today, and for those of us who are Resolute fans, I got some bad news and some good news for you. The bad news is that the Resolute as we know it is no more. It's been completely discontinued. However, the good news is that there's a new version that has been completely reworked. I think it still has the adventure-worthy spirit of the original, but a lot of the details have changed here. For the last couple of years, RZE's owner Travis has been listening to all the critiques of the Resolute, and he seems to have addressed almost every single one in this 2022 version. Now, the watch we're going to look at today is a prototype that was lent into the channel, and as such, all your standard prototype warnings apply. With that out of the way, let's first talk about the specs and then talk about what's changed. For the most part, the specs here are going to be the same as the older version. It's a 40mm wide titanium case, 46mm lug-to-lug, 20mm lug width, flat sapphire with AR, and 100 meters of water resistance, as well as the extra scratch-resistant coating, making this a field watch that's ready for just about anything. However, with regard to the specs, there are two major changes. The first is that this new version has traded in the Seiko NH35A movement to an upgraded Miyota 90S5. And thanks to that newer, thinner movement, RZE has been able to reduce the total thickness by just over a millimeter to 10.5. So not bad, those are two pretty good upgrades. But of course that upgrade in movement also comes with an upgrade in price. I think the original version started out at $399, whereas this new version starts out at $499 and goes up to $599 depending on if you want the strap or titanium bracelet. One of the other big changes is to the finishing of the case. The overall design is still the same, but instead of going with an all-blasted finish, this time it's entirely brushed. I think this allows the watch to still maintain a tool watch look, yet I think it's maybe a little bit more refined than the original, as that brush finish seems to soften the aggressive angles of the case. It's still the same great case, still very comfortable to wear, and still a bit tooly, but maybe not quite as tooly as the original. I actually like the blasted finish of the original, just because I think it is more pronounced. But as a whole, I don't see this as much of a change. It's more of a lateral move than an upgrade or a downgrade. However, the changes to the dial are probably the most noticeable and dramatic, as it went from something original to something less than, basically morphing itself into an Explorer-like design. Now, designing a microbrand is no easy feat. It seems like owners have to walk a rather fine line, as they need the right mix of original creativity and at the same time familiarity in order to be really successful. So they need something different enough to stand out, but not so different that people think it's strange or weird. So while the original doesn't look very odd, one of its biggest critiques was still the design, as it didn't quite look like a traditional field watch. So here RZE has corrected that, or maybe overcorrected it by going a bit Explorer. You might be able to tell that I'm a little mixed on this, as I really like the original for its uniqueness. Yet, at the same time, I gotta admit this looks fantastic. The sand textured dial works great with this design. It seems cleaner and more symmetrical, while everything is still clearly defined. And I especially like how the indices just seem to pop out at the dial. The same can also be said about the new handset. It's very similar to the original, but where that one had a brushed finish that blended into the gray dial, here it's polished, and I think that offers a clearer contrast, helping them to pop out and helping you to read the watch easier. And for some reason, they also switched the Lume end of the second hand. With regard to colorways, it looks like RZE has kept a couple of the classics, with this gray and fully lumed version. Yet, they've also added a yellow, pink, and darker green option. Yellow's not really my thing, but I think they all look pretty good with this design. Although, I'm actually a little surprised they didn't add a Tiffany blue option. I mean, if you already have yellow and pink, you might as well. Another big difference is with the date, as in there isn't one, which is also a change attributed to the Miyota 90S5, as it's basically a dateless version of their 9000 series, which again is something I'm a little mixed on. Personally, I always like to have a date, but I think with this style design, adding one would just mess up the symmetry. Lume is also a little different. Rather than going with the dual color blue-green setup, they've now switched to a straight application of blue BGW9. After testing them out, I'd say the longevity and brightness is just as good as the original, which for a field watch is great, as I found it to be on par with my Seiko Turtle. It's just maybe a little less interesting to look at. As for the bracelet, I believe it's the same basic design as the original, which is a great H-link style titanium bracelet that has an aggressive taper going from 20 to 16. And overall, thanks to that lighter weight as well as the aggressive taper, it's very comfortable to wear. The only real difference is that they went with a brushed finish to match the case rather than blasted. And again, I think that's more of a lateral change than an upgrade or downgrade. However, they didn't change something that I wish they had. Overall, it's a good bracelet, but the clasp is a friction release rather than push button. And that is something I hate with a capital H, and I can't stress that enough. And this particular one is rather stiff, and that makes it even harder to open. Which is a pity because the bracelet looks great on the watch, and it is really comfortable. You may be perfectly fine with it, but personally, I'd take a pass on the bracelet just because of that clasp. Now, between the two versions, I actually still prefer the first, at least a little bit. But at the same time, it's really hard to argue with the changes they've done here. It's a more refined look with a cleaner, well-defined dial. It still maintains the toughness and durability of the original, while making it a little bit easier to use. It's basically an improvement in almost every single way. It's also a very smart business decision on the part of RZE, as it not only opens this watch to a set of brand new customers, some of which were actually asking for these changes, but it's also different enough that older Resolute customers might want a new version as well, and especially for those who've always had a thing for an Explorer. Yet, at the same time, I think it's leaving part of itself behind in its path to stardom. That part of it that made it so novel and intriguing in the first place. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to call this new version homage, but I'd definitely call it an Explorer alternative, and a damn good one at that. Perhaps that's really the biggest difference between the two, as the original wasn't an alternative to anything, it was simply the Resolute, and I think that's the part of it I'll miss. Now, as usual, let me know your take on this one below, as well as if you think it's an upgrade or not. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time. See you next time.